First member of our tag team is quite experienced with facility expansion and hiring contractors for significant projects. Mike Lesmeister is the Senior Operations Manager for the Schooler Company in Omaha, Nebraska, and has been with Schooler for approximately 9 years. Mike's portfolio includes responsibilities for facility design, project management, safety, facility assessment, and acquisitions. Before joining Schooler, he was with Cargill Ag Horizons for 10 years, holding various positions across North America, including management of shuttle locations, barge locations, and an export facility. Mike is a Minnesota native and graduated in political science from South Dakota State University. The second member of the team is Marcus Neal, who has more than 20 years of experience designing, building, and operating grain and fertilizer facilities in North America and Asia. Marcus currently is Director of Facility Operations at Lansing Trade Group in Kansas City and has been with that firm for more than 2 years. He is responsible for facility design, project management, safety, facility assessment, and acquisitions. Previously, he spent 3 years with Purdue Agribusiness as Director of Engineering and 7 years with DeBruce Grain as Assistant Director of Operations. Marcus is a Minnesota native and graduated in Agricultural Engineering from the University of Minnesota. Please welcome Mike and Marcus.
Wow, what an honor. I wasn't expecting this. I want to thank the Academy, my management team, wrong speech. Well, as Matt so graciously introduced us, I'm Marcus Neal, and we're going to talk a little bit about contractor selection and post-project considerations. I'm going to take the first part, but Mike and I may tag team each item a little bit. So before we start, I want to start with a couple of general project considerations, and it may look a little funny when these come up, but the first is a quote from Kurt Vonnegut, who's a science fiction author. And a flaw in the human character is that everybody wants to build and nobody wants to do maintenance. When we talk about contractor selection, really what we need to talk about is holistic life cycle of an asset. What we want is for somebody that we can partner with over a long period of time and that is going to help us reach our goals and even maybe help define some of what that is. With that in mind, everybody likes the bright, shiny objects. Everybody likes a new facility, but the reality is that a lot of the facilities we operate or expand are 20, 30, 40, 100 years old. So we need to be thinking about the maintenance side of that, not just the new, bright, shiny object. The second is, anybody know who this guy is? Other than Bruce Willis, but who the character is? John McClane from the Die Hard movies. So one of the interesting things that quote he had out of that movie was, if you're not part of the problem or not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, stop being part of the problem. As we think through contractor selection, again, not only do we need to define our own goals, but grab contractors that are going to help us fulfill those goals. We've got to allow them to help us in reaching those goals. So in terms of the selection process itself, select who receives the bid package and what that bid package looks like. They're in a little bit backwards order because we've got to start with the bid package. What do we want to do? What do we want to reach? Those kind of things. We're going to get a quote from them. We're going to ask some follow-up questions, and they're going to ask us some questions to define what that scope is. Make sure we've got an apples-to-apples comparison as they come in. And then we're going to go through the final selection process. Bid package, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, just what the request for proposal. So cover letter. One of the things I want to make sure that I also say is that this presentation really focuses on larger scale projects. Some of this isn't always going to be, if you're replacing a spout or replacing a conveyor or expanding something that's not really big, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But this presentation is really geared towards major capital projects, and selecting contractors there. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that some of this needs to go into, some of the planning for this needs to go into even the smaller scale projects that we might do. So cover letter is going to talk about the description of the project, what it is, expected start and completion dates, codes and standards that we may have to follow or know that are in the area, and then unique requirements, location, noise standards, confined spaces, what kind of conditions are they going to expect to be working in. We talk about scope of work. The Bills did a nice job, I thought, yesterday of walking us through that process and managing that. Specifications, equipment specifications, both on the material handling side, the storage side, dust collection, all of those things, both from a mechanical and from an electrical standpoint. Insurance requirements, each company is different and may have different levels of insurance depending on the size of the project. Make sure that those are in that bid package. Safety package, with Lansing, we have a contractor safety package that goes out to either before or with the bid package and I'll talk a little bit more about this as well, but that we want to get back some information from the contractor that goes into our making sure that they're qualified to do the job and goes into that selection process. Any drawings and sketches, conceptual napkins, anything like that that can be added to that to the project. And then a form of bid. And again, I'll talk a little bit about this as well, but how do you want the bid to come back? How exactly do you want it presented to you so that it makes your job easier as you're comparing the contractors that you've got bids coming back from? Contractor selection. So we've talked about how do we select. Now everybody knows what a bin looks like and what a facility looks like. And so the purpose of this, again, is not to show you what that is or what the different aspects are, but to look at that most of our facilities or most of the projects that we do are not going to be greenfield sites. They're not going to be from the ground up. They may be scale replacement, they may be leg replacement, so they can be this whole picture that's going in new, or it can be bits and pieces and parts of it. So what we've done is in order to select who receives the bid, is break it out by cost in size of the bid. Under $100,000, we've got a list of contractors who are qualified to do those. Up to $1 million, and then over $1 million. You're not going to bring a general contractor from halfway across the country for a $100,000 project. It wouldn't make sense for them, wouldn't make sense for you. So those size projects are going to typically be a more local contractor, millwright, something like that. Again, most of this focuses on larger scale projects, but I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the smaller ones as well. So how do we select? Who do we select? Are they qualified? Safety record and rating. And this is where I'm going to talk about some of those qualifications, especially as it comes to safety standards. Certificate of insurance. Experience modification rate. This one is important because this comes directly from their insurance company. Industry standard is going to be a 1. Over a 1 is not a good thing. Means they're less safe or have a higher rating from their own insurance company. Less than 1 is really desirable, and I'll show you how we ask for the contractors to bring this information back to us. Paul Luther talked about getting, in his presentation yesterday, getting contractors to give you copies of their OSHA 300 logs. We asked for those 300 logs from 3 years previous, and again, there's an example here in just a second. Contractor qualification forms, which you'll see in a second, and then whether or not, depending on the size of the project, do you need on-site safety personnel? Do they need to be full-time, or do they need to be randomly there, or are you doing that safety inspection yourself, or some combination of those? So here's what the first form looks like. It's a contractor qualification form. This is their safety evaluation, their safety performance. You'll see at the top there is the experience modification rate coming directly from their insurance companies. In this particular, and I've obviously left names off of here, they're right at that 1 or just slightly below that one average. So just is indicating that they're really safety-wise average company. But then we get into a little more detail about their accident history just below. They worked 150,000 hours in 2011 with no recordables and no lost time accidents. They had a couple of incidents in 2010. And as I bring contractors in or get them on the phone, I'm going to want to know what were those incidents, what happened, how did you make it better, how did you retrain or educate your folks so that those same problems don't come up. So they're obviously a fairly big company in the number of hours that they worked. And then we also asked if they've had any OSHA violations. And then if yes, we'll talk through what those were, why did it happen, and those kind of things. The next one is also part of one of the qualifications that we bring in, and this is where we want to know what their employees or what the crew members have been trained in or will be trained in what areas or what identified areas really apply to our scope of work. So if they're going to be working on just a foundation piece or a ground conveyor or something like that, it may be a whole lot different than if they're talking about building a whole bin where there's going to be confined space and those kind of things. So we get them to check all those off, the ones that are, and then we'll even talk through what their programs are, what do they look like. Let me see some of the documentation that goes along with the fact that you've got this training. So we've talked about these four so far. Some general questions that can separate one contractor from another. Can they start on time? Reed just talked about a little bit ago, everybody wants to be done by harvest. Well, if it's not realistic to start in such a time frame that we can get done by harvest, then we really need to consider whether or not we can use that contractor. Now, if they all tell us the same thing, then we've got to adjust our schedule. But even though we may like a contractor who may come in with the best bid and those kind of things, if they can't start on the schedule that we need, it kind of throws them out. Can they complete it on time? This is an important one as well, just as we talked about with harvest. Everybody wants to be done by harvest, but is that realistic? What other obligations do they have? Are they big enough to do multiple projects? I don't need to know all the details around their other projects, but I want to know what they are, kind of what their time frame is for that, how many crews do they have, making sure that they're not going to pull crews off of my project to go work on some other company's project. Did they bid what I asked for, what we asked for? This is an important one. Not because they can't ask the question, do you mind if we option this? And you'll see an example of this in just a second. But really, did they do what we asked them to do? We've got specific goals, specific reasons for asking for what we want. And if they don't supply that or don't give us that, there's really not a reason to continue discussing. What kind of history do these next two go together? What kind of history do we have with them? And if we don't have a history, what references do they have? One of the nice things about being in groups like this in the industry as a whole is that on the operational side, or at least on the experience side, there's really not a whole lot of trade secrets. So if I know that Mike's got a contractor that he uses that I'm looking at, but I don't have any history with him, I can call Mike and ask him to give me a reference. Is he worthy? Should I spend any time sending him a bid package, discussing my project with him, those kind of things. And then finally, the thing that's missing on here is dollars. Obviously, this is important. Everybody's confined by, and everybody has a budget that they go by. But as Bill Lister said yesterday, functionality needs to outweigh financial expense. It really is true that just because it's the lowest number doesn't mean you're going to get the best project. And oftentimes, it's not going to end up being the best or exactly what you want. So this is an example of what I bring to our board when I'm putting a project together, or not when I'm putting it together, but when I'm going through the final selection process. What you'll see here is on the left-hand side, I've got kind of a snapshot of what the scope of work was, or what areas it was. We had some ground storage, some steel space, some warehouse space. What our receiving capacity was, we wanted 20,000 an hour. Reclaim capacity was 20,000 an hour. Drawer capacity 10,000. Dust system, did they have a screening bin, and what the construction schedule were. All the important pieces that my board wants to know. They don't want the great detail about it. They just want to know what is it that we're going to build. Down below that is the form of bid. This is the way that I want contractors to present this back to me. Those 12 divisions there, going from foundations all the way down through electrical estimates. I want it back in that way because it makes my job easier when I'm comparing contractors. Added in some tax, permits, and drainage infrastructure items. Contingency, I'll talk a little bit about that. In this case, because it's such a large project, the goal is to be under 10% contingency. These are going to be things that just come up during a project that we really aren't expecting. We'll put in 10% with the goal really being somewhere south of 4 or 5%. So at the bottom then, at the very bottom, we also put in there whether or not there's insurance risk in there, or risk insurance, and then a performance bond. Now, what I also want you to look at is on the far right-hand side was our internal estimate prior to just when we were in the planning phases. I highlighted a couple areas on there because we made some assumptions that were completely inaccurate. One of the biggest being that the area that we were in, we assumed that we were going to be building fairly close to bedrock. The area all around was bedrock, but when we went to do the soil testing, found out that we were kind of in a river valley that had rock on either side, but where we were, it went down quite a ways. And so we made an assumption about the foundation prior to, and this brings up a point that Steve made yesterday about getting those soil borings done as quickly as possible, especially when you're talking about bin design and that kind of thing. So the areas that I've got highlighted here represented about $1.4 million that we were under in our very initial process of this. As we were going through this, contractor B actually came back to us and said, I can give you more space, and only part of it be flat storage, the other being upright space. Would you entertain that option? Well, the reason that we went with the warehouse space was that we considered that to be the lowest cost. When they came back to us and said we can do something different, that's exactly what we were looking for, is a contractor that can offer us solutions that even go beyond what our initial goals were. So he gave us more space. It was more money, but when we evaluated this project, it came down to contractor A and B, and you can see they're not the lowest cost, but they were able to do what the others weren't, which was, one, meet our start and stop times or completion times, and contractor B gave us solutions that we didn't think we could have. So I hope that's a little bit beneficial there. So Reed also had a Dobert cartoon, and this is one of my favorite. I'm a big fan of Dobert as well. I need a budget, and you can be on either side of this. I need a budget estimate for my project, but don't have a scope or design for it yet. Okay, then my estimate is $3.5 million. We don't know anything about my project. Well, that makes two of us. This is classic, and when I say that this, you could be on either side of this. You could be the contractor could be the woman, or you could be the woman addressing a contractor who's Dilbert, and he's going to come back to you. And if you don't know what it is you want, if you don't have that defined internally, how's he going to give you an accurate estimate of what that project's going to cost? The other side of that is, now I'll pick on merchandisers here for a little while. They'll come to you and say, I want to build elevator A. And you say, well, what do you want it to do? How fast do you want it to be? How efficient? Those kind of things. Well, I don't know. All right, well then, here's my number. So I'll leave it on that and turn it over to Mike for his part of the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Good job by Marcus there. Well, I get to wrap up the conference as well as talk about post-project considerations, so it kind of goes hand in hand, right? So as we wrap up a project, there's things that you have to consider both on the physical asset as well as the paper trail, right? So on your punch list is something that you will generate at the end of the project when you walk through your final facility, whether it's a leg or if it's a grain facility that you did from a greenfield site or an addition. So in theory, at the end of your project, your punch list should be relatively small, okay? Because throughout your project, you want to make sure you're constantly communicating with that project, either that project manager or your facility manager, as well as the contractor, on things that they see that are wrong or your eyes see that is wrong, okay? So in theory, at the end, that list should be quite small again. So, and when you do that final walkthrough, you have to ask yourself, who's really qualified to go through that final walkthrough with you? Okay, sure, you hired a millwright, sure, you hired an electrician, sure, you hired the dirt contractor, but who do you really want to have with you when you do that final walkthrough? As you can see, going back to this project, you know, you could have 3 different types of equipment, from the different conveyor, different belt conveyor, different leg, different bins, you know, all that possibly could not be coming from one particular vendor. So when I do a particular walkthrough and I work with a contractor, I put it on them to say, okay, we're going to do our final walkthrough. I am going to schedule those particular suppliers to be on site with me, to be with you, to kind of a checks and balance to make sure everything's installed correctly. You know, so I put more on to the contractor to help me and help our company understand what's the right way and the wrong way of doing things. And like I said, it's just a good checks and balance as far as that goes. So I make sure there's an equipment manufacturer or supplier there on site. I make sure throughout the period of the project, and especially at the end, if there's concrete testing that has to be done, if there's soil tests that have to be done, I work with whatever particular vendor or supplier that we had to do those jobs, that we go through those checks and balances. So in this particular case, the concrete test breaks, the soil sample compaction tests, you know, I'll work with the dirt contractor and the concrete contractor just to make sure we didn't miss anything towards the end of the project. The electrical inspection. So make sure at the end of your project, whether you have your state electrical inspector sign off on everything, make sure you have his final check off. As well, if the state fire marshal is involved in your area, that he comes through and does his final walkthrough to make sure all your emergency escapes, all your fall protection, everything that he has to do with that is also signed off. And another good set of other eyes is most companies have a safety inspection or somebody in charge of their safety. Invite them out to come out. You know, don't do it on your own, because as you get involved in the project, you get caught up in everything, and you start to be doing this instead of going out and doing this. So the more eyes that you have on that project as your final walkthrough, it's just a good checks and balance. Now we slip back onto the what I would call the office portion. Oh, I'm sorry. Going back as far as finishing up on the punch list. So you would write down those items, right, to make sure that they get completed. And just because you have a final punch list doesn't mean that the contractor is off the hook and it's done, he gets paid, and it's forgotten about till the next project. So, because I guarantee you, after you run 10,000 bushels through that project, or 50,000 bushels, or 100,000 bushels, you're still going to find a minute kind of mistakes or something that might have happened, okay? Some liner will lift up, something will happen where we have to have that contractor come back. So there's a warranty typically a warranty in your contract, okay? This is a perfect example. We put up a 7,000 bushel an hour dryer, right? We focused on a lot on the outside, making sure all the catwalk and everything is all good to go. Access ladders, platforms, whole ball of wax. Well, we go walking around the corner, come up, and we all kind of look at this, right? So immediately it's like, okay, we focus so much on the outside, we forgot when we put this in that there's no access platforms or anything like that. So that would go on the punch list, okay? Punch lists are easy. It doesn't have to be complicated. I typically, when I'm walking around with the contractor or millwright or the electrician, I make them write it down physically. Because once you start talking about something that you want fixed, and if you don't write it down, it goes in this year, out this year, and you tend to forget, they tend to forget, and then it never gets completed. And then the only time you hear about it is when you actually go back on the site 6 months later and the employees are saying, hey, when is this going to get fixed? Okay? So, and by having the contractor actually write it down themselves, it puts more meaning on getting it done before that final payment goes out. So in this case, I just had them physically write it out. Actually took my iPhone, snapped a picture at the end of the walkthrough, sent an email to myself, printed it off when I got back to the office, stuck it in the job file, and before the payment actually went out, he actually emailed this same punch list back saying, done, 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 completion date was X, and then the final payment goes out, okay? This is another example of, every different vendor might have their own punch list. This was putting up a building. And this is why, I put up 9 buildings, okay? I would still say I'm not the guy to do the final checkoff, okay? So I have this particular vendor come out and do the walkthrough with us. What I thought was pretty much a done building. This building is 600 foot long, right? Well, he comes out and, there wasn't a whole lot wrong with it, obviously, with the building that size, but he's able to detail that out for us, and even the installer who actually installed it missed these items. So it's always good to put it back on the supplier to come out and do your final checkoff. So we'll move on to closeout prep. Closeout prep, this is what the list is, obtain your final lien waivers. That's kind of the big thing on your closeout prep. Everybody should have been obtaining lien waivers as you go through a project, okay? You want to make sure your vendor or your contractor is paying your vendor and subcontractors accordingly, okay? So, and we'll go into that here a little bit more detail, but you also want to obtain all your equipment manuals. You want to make sure that those get to the job site. And then also obtain your final as-built drawings. So the concrete foundations may have changed from the original drawings. Your layout may have changed a little bit from the original plan. So you just want to ask for that, get it to the location, and so they have it on hand. You want to prepare your final payment. So if everything is checked out and contractor's done a good job, issue that final payment. Shake hands, tell them they did a good job, or and communicate with him. And then internally, you want to prepare your own asset list. So if you put up a dryer and a leg and a wet leg and a dry leg, every company probably does it a little bit differently, but make sure your accounting people get that asset list. And then finally, notify your insurance carrier. I mean, they're going to want to know what equipment that you added onto your site. This is something that I do when we first get lien waivers. So this is a a vendor list. So this is in particular is a contractor that does work for us, right? So in this case, they're pouring concrete. So I issue the first payment. Before they get their second payment, they have to give me this list. And so this list is every vendor that, or subcontractor, or supplier, I should say, that they do business with. And I set a limit of $5,000. So, or I should say our company does. So anything over $5,000, they have to supply me this list. So at the end of my project, I can go through this list and say, I need a lien waiver from this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and I should have each one of those companies signed off on that, okay? And this list might change as you go through a project, and that's also another good checks and balance, because before every payment goes out, they have to resupply me this list. And so they may add or subtract one, and then they give me a final one, but I go through all of them just to make sure we haven't missed anybody. This is an example of a final lien waiver, and again, this is a final lien waiver where basically in this particular case, it was the concrete supplier. So saying that this particular company has paid them in full, and they release all rights to the lien. So additional points to consider is it the manager, superintendent, or project manager, or who's ever managing that project, what's he going to do for training? So hopefully you're either working with, again, your supplier or electrician or whomever to coordinate that for your employees. Future planning, what did you learn on the project, okay? If you're only doing one project once a year or once every 3 years, you know, what did you learn on that project? Or as you go through to another site, what can you carry forward? Take good notes. And we'll get into that here in just a few minutes. And here's the big one, actual versus budget. You don't hear anything when you're under budget, right? It's just move on to the next project. So when things go bad and you're over budget, then you have everybody asking you why you went over budget. So change orders. Rule number one for me or for us, if I'm doing a change order, it's my project, I never sign off on my own change order. Somebody one level up or 2 levels up always signs the change order. And that just keeps everybody on that spiel where, okay, can I do something where I don't have to generate a change order? Because change orders are easy to generate. They're just hard to explain once you get over your project limit. So, then you have to ask yourself, why did they happen and what could have prevented them? 2 examples for us, same deal with the dryer project. In our due diligence, when we put in the project numbers, we called the utility company and said, okay, can that transformer handle this capacity? We were told initially yes. When they physically went out to the site after the project was approved, lifted up the panel, said, no, that's not the case. So we had to set up another transformer, bore underneath the railroad tracks, and come up with power to the dryer. So on the next project, I tend to ask myself, okay, do I want to get my electrician to go out and physically look at the panel with the utility company before I do a large-scale project? The answer to that now is yes. So the other example here is we went to go put in the foundation for the dryer, ended up ripping out an old bin, ended up finding all this old foundation underneath. All that had to get ripped out. That was above and beyond the cost of what was originally in there. That's one of those deals where that's that 10% that Marcus is talking about. So there's always an unknown. I haven't done a project yet where there's some unknown that doesn't come up. If somebody tries to talk you into doing less than 10% on a project, good luck with that. So it's, like I said, nobody complains about a project coming in under budget. you get a lot of questions answered or asked to when it goes over. So, kind of wrapping up here, finalizing out your project, ask yourself on a project, were the objectives being met? Was the time objective being met? And so I look back on the timeline and I mark in what was realistic. I guarantee you the timeline never changes. It's right before. It's either October 1st if you're in the Midwest because you want to get all wrapped up before corn harvest, right? Or it's wheat harvest or whatever. So you're always going to run into rain delays. You're always going to run into, some act of God, right? So you learn as you do projects, and you learn that it's never going to be fair weather throughout the whole time. You're going to understand that millwrights don't want to work 7 days a week for 3 months. So you start figuring it out and you start being honest with yourself on what to do for your next project. So, and how can things be improved? You did something on a project. What did I learn from that? How can I improve on it? Whether it's electrical, from the millwright side, communication is huge. Did I communicate with everybody that should be involved with that project? And then lastly, how well was the safety management of the project? Could I have done a better job managing the safety aspect for the millwrights that were on site, asking for help from internally, I'm not there, can you go out there and help me out managing on the project side? So, with that, any questions for either Marcus or I? Don't be too shy. Good? All right. Well, thank you very much.